LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the August 14th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out the 11 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which it'd be really informative, educational, fair use, media criticism, and political commentary show for you all today. I'm covering Hunter Biden. I know a lot of people on the right, especially since I watch a lot of Fox News, say the corporate media doesn't cover Hunter Biden enough. Well, you can see Hunter Biden prosecutor David Weiss gets special counsel status is the lead story of my media mix-up this Monday, and that's because it was extensively covered by all of the corporate news outlets, and I will be talking about that and showing you clips from Hunter Biden's lawyer, Abby Lowell, and also Representative Jamie Raskin and Representative Dan Goldman talking about the case. I'll also talk about how Hunter Biden might have a Second Amendment defense that was discussed briefly on NBC News' Meet the Press. And I'll talk about the Maui wildfires and criticize the way the corporate media covered the Maui wildfires, even though they gave extensive coverage to it on Sunday. But before I get to that, I want to get to my political comedy clip. And this is a whole different topic that's been covered excessively on Fox News. This deal that the Biden administration has worked out to so far get these five U.S. citizens held in Iranian detention put on house arrest rather than being in jail, which is a good thing, and involves releasing money that South Korea owes Iran for oil that South Korea already got. Like they got the oil and then sanctions were put in, and so they never paid for the oil. And they've been talking about this, I'll show you some Fox News chyrons from this morning in just a minute. But first, I want to show you, this is sort of like the reverse cross-examination. I often give the news anchors credit for the cross-examination of the week, but this is the newsmaker guest doing the reverse cross-examination almost on the host and like refuting all of the Fox News talking points, making Shannon Bream and former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo look totally ridiculous, which is why I find it kind of political comedy. You can let me know what you think after we watch that clip together over here.
Okay, so I want to start with the Iran deal there. Again, as you heard the chairman just talking about, we've been told that there would be guardrails on this money, $6 billion that would flow through the Qataris. And so here's what Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said Friday, warning us that they still have control of these people. They're still in custody, and adding this: the decision on how to utilize these unfrozen resources and financial assets lies with the Islamic Republic of Iran, telegraphing that they plan to do what they plan to do with the money. Money is obviously fungible. A lot of this re-invokes for people, which you heard the chairman reference there, the $400 million in cash that was then followed up by $1.7 billion, or excuse me, $1.3 additional billion in cash that went in a prisoner swap back in 2015 under President Obama. Some of the people we're now trying to get out, they were kidnapped or wrongfully imprisoned since we paid that money. I mean, do you believe the Iranians can actually change their behavior?
There's a fundamental misunderstanding about what's going on here. The money that's going from Korea to Iran is money from oil that Iran sold to Korea, and Korea did not pay for that, South Korea, because the sanctions that were imposed under the Trump administration. And there were about a half dozen countries in that situation: Italy, India, a few others. All of those other countries under the Trump administration have already given Iran that money with no strings attached under a special payment system that was set up under the Trump administration. South Korea didn't pay that money for complicated reasons in terms of how they wanted to transfer it. So money of this kind has already been transferred. This is money to pay for oil that was given to South Korea. This isn't some sort of frozen asset situation. So this type of money has already been transferred. Second, the deal has not been finalized. Qatar will control the money. So whatever the mullah in Iran has to say about it, it will be controlled by Qatar, not by Iran. So that aspect of it makes sense. We're still waiting to see what the prisoner swap looks like and to finalize the deal. But there's a lot more detail here that I think isn't being understood.
Yeah, but
The Trump administration transferred billions of dollars from these other countries back to Iran with no strings attached, and I don't hear anybody talking about that.
Well, in this current scenario, though, giving them $6 billion, and they will say it can be for medicine and for humanitarian needs. We know money is fungible, and there are real concerns that this amounts to an exorbitant ransom payment, critics would say.
But again, it's not, as I just said. Where were those real concerns during the Trump administration when money from a bunch of other countries was being transferred to Iran, no strings attached, no prisoners returned? So it just doesn't seem like a legitimate complaint based on the facts of the situation.
Yeah, so if there are people complaining now, and they didn't complain then, very fair question for them. But let's do this. Let's talk about critics who say this actually is putting a bounty on Americans' heads. They include former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, involved with a lot of those discussions.
Right, and that is a fundamental misunderstanding of what this money is. Okay, it's not a bounty because we're not paying the money. It's Iran's money that was sitting in South Korea.
Withheld under
it's
sanctions.
Not a bounty.
Okay, well, let me play the Secretary and let you respond.
When I was Secretary of State, we had denied them wealth. They were down to just a little bit of money. The Biden administration's come in and upended all of that, and the Iranians will now be flush and their terror campaign more successful.
I mean, this is a country that chants death to America.
I understand all that, but that's completely untrue. Under Secretary Pompeo, these other countries, I'm aware of Italy and India, there were a few others that I hadn't found, money was transferred from them. Same situation, where Iran had sold stuff to these countries, sanctions kicked in, money hadn't been paid. Under Secretary Pompeo, that money was transferred from those countries to Iran, no strings attached. Okay, so it is not a bounty, and is factually incorrect what Secretary Pompeo is saying.
Okay, let's turn to Afghanistan.
Let's turn to Afghanistan. For my history and philosophy fans out there, would you agree with me that Shannon Bream got slapped by Adam Smith's invisible hand in that last clip? I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself making that joke as a big fan of history, philosophy, and I guess economics there. The Adam Smith invisible hand of the market. Sorry, I trying to do my own political comedy because all the writers are on strike. What can I do? But anyway, that is one reason that is ridiculous, is because Shannon Bream in the previous segment before Adam Smith was on had this Republican Michael McCall on, and did not bring up any of the points that Adam Smith brought up in that interview. Here you can see I've just put in the live chat the whole transcript of Fox News Sunday from yesterday, and that's how you can tell a so-called journalist is biased on Fox News, is when they interview the Democrats, they bring up the Republican talking points, but when they interview the Republicans, do they really bring up the Democratic talking points? The only thing she brought up with Michael McCall, if you look at the transcript, was Democrats saying, well, it's going to be controlled by Qatar, and so it's not directly controlled by the Iranians, but or the Iranians, but you can see there that Adam Smith totally demolished the talking points, talked about all this other money that had been owed to the Iranians when the sanctions went into effect under Trump, and the Trump administration figured out ways to get all that money to Iran with actually no strings attached like the Qatari control and no hostages released. So to call the Biden administration deal the things they've been calling it on Fox News is totally false. What Mike Pompeo said is totally false. Shannon Bream had no follow-up. But the thing about Fox News is they showed clips of Michael McCall criticizing the deal on the programs today, never talking about what Adam Smith said. And here you can see they did these chyrons, like here when they had a General Jack Keane on to talk about this. U.S.-Iran prisoner deal sparks terror concerns, despite the whole thing being controlled by Qatar. Critics say planned bankrolls Iran nukes terror ops, also not true. And then critics accuse Biden administration of paying Iran ransom. See, these were all from this morning on Fox News. And so like the Adam Smith facts never like trickled down to Fox News. So that also makes it especially ridiculous. And I guess it just also proves how Fox News is more of a propaganda outlet of the Republican Party than an actual journalistic organization, which is what Roger Ailes created it to be, as you can see described over in this book, The Loudest Voice in the Room by Gabriel Sherman. I point that out almost every episode. And speaking of Fox News bias, I'm going to show you the Fox News Sunday news summary on 2 topics. This is the longest news summary. It's almost 7 minutes, but first they spend some time talking about the Maui wildfires, and they spin it kind of in a way to make it look like the Democratic governor, Josh Green, or the democratically appointed, the Biden administration's FEMA director, Dina Criswell, I know Criswell is her last name, that they're somehow at fault, and it's like bad government response. And you'll see things in there like government won't explain why the emergency response was so bad. They also, of course, never mention climate change and its role in the Maui wildfires. And then they switch over to Lucas Tomlinson talking about both the Hunter Biden special counsel, and then everyone's got a special counsel. It's all like false equivalency in the talk about what's going on in different candidates' legal woes this week. And so I pretty much pre-criticized that Fox News Sunday clip. The news summary, like I said, it's almost 7 minutes long, but I want you to see all the Fox News bias and all of its glory, and I'll talk about it with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
We begin this morning with breaking news. Nearly 100 people are confirmed dead on the island of Maui, making it the single deadliest disaster in Hawaii's history and the deadliest U.S. wildfire in more than 100 years. Catastrophic blazes began tearing through multiple areas of the state Tuesday night. Many residents and tourists caught completely off guard. These drone images out of West Maui show the intense flames as they quickly spread across the island. And this is just some of the utter destruction left behind, devastating damage in multiple areas, homes and communities reduced to just ashes. Residents now wondering where to turn. Take a look at this before and after satellite imagery of the historic town of Lahaina. It was nearly burned to the ground, a spot beloved by locals and tourists alike, decimated. Fox News senior national correspondent William Jeunesse has been on the ground in Maui now the last couple of days talking with those impacted by these devastating fires. William.
Well, Shannon, there are a lot of questions like why didn't Maui activate that emergency alert system to give people more time? But for those living here, it's much more simple, right? Are my friends alive? Where am I going to live? Do I have a job? And how do we recover?
Right over there. I'm born and raised here, and I was planning on raising my 3-year-old daughter there.
Like most of Lahaina today, Lena is homeless. Some family members died, others, she learned, survived.
And she finally answers her phone. Like, she has a 1-year-old baby. Yesterday was his birthday.
Lahaina was really small, nice historical place, and it's gone.
Hurricane Dora passed 600 miles south of Hawaii. No one predicted high winds. They were wrong.
The smoke was so black and so thick, we were worried about getting killed from this.
Captain Lydia Lindermans watched the entire marina, including the boats inside, go up in flames.
So there was no real route to go north or south or towards the mountains. The only escape once the thing swooped in was to get in the water.
Gary Savage jumped off the breakwall with dozens of others, spending the next 8 hours in the water before being rescued.
I don't know, man. I just almost say just dumb luck. Like, really just feel lucky and guilty for having the home.
This family had just seconds to evacuate, but Maui never activated its emergency siren system.
There was no emergency sounds. They did not sound off the tsunami warnings.
Officials refused to say why. Many died in their cars trying to escape.
And she jammed her car in there, trapping her inside, and the car next to her burst into flame,
The search for victims continues with just 3% of structures inspected by cadaver dogs. Countless remain unaccounted for. FEMA is mobilizing resources. The biggest challenge, housing. 4,500 need shelter.
We're not taking anything off the table.
FEMA Director Deanna Criswell and Governor Josh Green say hotels promised 1,000 rooms.
Bringing in temporary housing is certainly one of the tools that we have in our toolbox, but we can also do other things like work with direct leasing and use some of the available vacation homes.
But for the generations that built Lahaina, the cultural heart of Maui is broken.
I can look at structures and I don't even remember what that was. Nothing here is recognizable to me.
Now, there is a curfew in effect, and this is where that line begins, and it will stretch for miles in a matter of hours. Shannon?
William Jeunesse, thank you so much, reporting live from Maui. And if you would like to help people affected by the Hawaii wildfires, you can donate at redcross.org/foxforward, or just this, very quickly, text Hawaii to 90999, and you'll make a $10 donation. Back here in Washington, a criminal trial now appears likely for Hunter Biden after a plea deal involving tax and gun-related charges has fallen apart. This week, a special counsel, a familiar face many conservatives do not trust, was tapped to lead the ongoing investigation. It's an unprecedented time in American politics ahead of 2024, with 3 active special counsels whose investigations all have ties to the leading candidates from both parties. Jack Smith, heading both of Donald Trump's cases into his handling of classified documents and his alleged efforts to overturn 2020 election results. Then there's Robert Hur, investigating President Biden's classified documents case. And now the appointment of David Weiss, overseeing the charges facing the son of a sitting president. We're going to break all of this down in just a minute with our legal panel. But first, Lucas Tomlinson joins us live from the White House with the status of all of these ongoing investigations. Hello, Lucas.
Shannon, the White House hoped the investigation into Hunter Biden would be over by now to focus on 2024. But today, both sides remain far apart on a plea deal. The case could go to trial, and a special counsel has been named.
Mr. Weiss, in his capacity as U.S. Attorney, began investigating allegations of certain criminal conduct by, among others, Robert Hunter Biden.
Trump-appointed prosecutor David Weiss had been leading the Hunter Biden probe for the past 5 years. His appointment could allow him to bring more charges against Hunter outside Delaware. For years, Republicans have accused the Justice Department of interfering in the probe. The chairman of the House Oversight Committee says Hunter received $20 million from foreign sources, including China, Russia, and Ukraine, while his father was vice president.
Joe was right front and center in this from day one. This is an investigation about Joe Biden.
President Biden has long denied any involvement in his son's overseas business dealings.
Never talk business in England. I'm confident. I've never spoken to my son about his overseas business dealings.
Thank you very much. Back in Washington on Friday, a federal judge told former President Donald Trump to cool it on social media after this Truth Social post following his third indictment. The judge telling Trump's attorneys, quote, "I caution you and your client to take special care in your public statements about this case."
Georgia's former lieutenant governor will appear before a grand jury on Tuesday ahead of a possible 4th Trump indictment. When Trump was sworn into office in 2017, Georgia had 2 Republican senators. Today, it has none. Shannon?
Lucas Tomlinson reporting live at the White House. Thank you, Lucas. Now to our legal panel. George Washington,
And Jonathan Turley, the Fox News legal panel, I'll spare you that, but he's like such a partisan hack for the right wing. I remember years ago, Jonathan Turley was not this bad. I don't know what happened to Jonathan Turley, but anyway, that was the Fox News Sunday news summary that I pretty much pre-criticized. Beforehand, I talked about how they tried to play up the government incompetence of Josh Green, the governor of Hawaii, and then Deanne Criswell, the FEMA director in the Biden administration. Without a lot of evidence, they claim, they won't tell us why the emergency alert system didn't work and why this all happened. And that seems a little extreme, especially given the next clip I'm going to show you where on MSNBC that same morning, yesterday morning. I mean, this is live, so the Sunday show with Jonathan Capehart might have been a couple hours later, but you'll see when I get to the CBS News Face the Nation news summary, they actually have a clip of Josh Green talking about this fire hurricane, like they're almost like fire-nados or shark-nados, or it's like the coming threat from climate change. That climate change and global warming were not mentioned anywhere on Fox News Sunday, and also not on ABC, the next news summary I'm going to show you. But before, and that's one of the points I wanted to make, is some of the Fox News bias is all throughout the corporate media. It's not just partisan Republican bias, but a lot of the corporate media doesn't talk about climate change and global warming when they should. I've been talking about this for weeks now, as we've been seeing these stories about the hottest July ever and the hottest days ever recorded on Earth and all of that. And so they don't talk about climate change and global warming, maybe because they're like big corporations that benefit from the status quo and are involved in with fossil fuel, or I don't even know why that is. And then there's this other bias that the all news media has. It's almost like the if it bleeds, it leads bias that all media has, where if there's compelling video, they're more likely to cover people dying than if there's no way to show it in video. And natural disasters get that over coverage. I guess it's around 100 people have died in the Maui wildfires, and it maybe end up being hundreds, but over 300 people died of COVID in the United States last the last week I could find the weekly deaths for, and there's an uptick in COVID. 1.2 million people. I guess since the pandemic, I always have to put this disaster coverage and the deaths involved in the context of over 1 million people died, and the media didn't really cover it that well, and still never really has. And anyway, that was the other point I wanted to make, that's in all of the corporate media. But like I said, on the Sunday show with Jonathan Capehart had on the governor of Hawaii, Josh Green, and he actually answered some of the questions. I mean, there's going to be a transparent investigation into the emergency alert system and whether government reacted the way it should, but he also had some initial explanations for the problem. He's also an emergency room physician, so he knows how to evaluate how people perform in a crisis. And he talks about the fire hurricane, the Sharknado of climate change, and how this is a warning to the people of Earth, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
So, Governor, as you know, the initial response to this emergency has been criticized. Reports suggest there was a lack of audible sirens and warnings once the wildfires started, giving people less time to evacuate. Your reaction to that, and was the initial emergency response lacking?
Well, my reaction, of course, as an emergency room doctor, more than as a governor, is that it is almost impossible to know in the throes of the acute part of a crisis if you did everything that you could. We have, in my office, asked for a comprehensive review with our Attorney General because we decided to be on this fully transparently right from the start. But let me share a few things. What was happening was this. It was a fire hurricane. And I want to warn the entire planet about this, all of America and all of the world. We were experiencing very dry conditions, drought conditions because of global warming, which is obviously very real for us here and everywhere. In addition to those drought conditions and difficulties with water management because there's just not enough water here in our islands, we then had the penumbra of a hurricane. Hurricane Dora had just passed south of us, leaving 60-mile-per-hour winds still with gusts up to 81 miles per hour. So what happened was when fire jumped from one spot to another, there were 3 or 4 fires going on at the same time. It got seeded very quickly with those 80-mile-per-hour gusted winds. And then the fire moved essentially at a mile per minute, 60 miles an hour down through the community. And that's what a fire hurricane is going to look in the era of global warming. And so we have to all do right now what we can to stop global warming and reverse it. Now, as to the sirens, we'll know soon whether or not they did enough to get those sirens going. But there was massive destruction of telecommunications. Otherwise, we ourselves would have communicated with each other like we always do within seconds on our cell phones. And that's basically what happened. But we'll make sure we get to all the answers that people deserve. I've also authorized the dual status command center with the president and the Joint Chiefs. So now we have a lot of military presence to protect the area also, and let people do the investigation.
And Governor.
So yeah, wow, that was quite the statement from Governor Josh Green there about the fire hurricanes, and it's something the people of Earth need to watch out for, and that's the real story that's being missed, certainly in the Fox News Sunday news summary. Also in this ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary, they don't talk about climate change or global warming. I moved it. Usually I go from longest to shortest news summary. I moved this one up because I wanted to juxtapose it with the Fox News Sunday news summary, because here you'll see Jon Karl does what they did on Fox News Sunday, where they tried to cover both the Maui wildfires and the burgeoning legal problems of both Biden and Trump. But I think they did it in a much more fair and balanced, for want of another phrase, way, and actual, like, journalistically compared to Fox News Sunday, which is why I wanted to juxtapose them, and I'll talk about that. And this is 3 minutes shorter. They also did it with 3 minutes less, but they still have the bias for, like, covering news that where, you know, people dying, where it creates compelling video of destruction and, you know, groups of crying people and refugees, etc., over in this clip.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. We'll get to the major political developments in a moment, but first, tragic news overnight in Hawaii. The death toll in Maui now climbing to more than 90 and expected to grow, making this the deadliest U.S. wildfire in the last 100 years. Thousands have been left homeless, and buildings have been burned to the ground. ABC's Whit Johnson is on the scene tracking the latest. Whit?
John, good morning to you. We're still getting a sense of the scope and scale of this disaster and the heartbreak that so many are experiencing in this community and across the island here on Maui. Here we are standing in front of yet another burned out home. And this morning there are still 2 wildfires burning as fire crews work to put out hot spots. The death toll from those devastating wildfires has now increased to at least 93, making this the deadliest U.S. wildfire in modern history. Search and rescue teams scouring the rubble, looking for hundreds of people still missing, and many families separated by the flames, the burned out buildings, and the roadblocks are now desperately trying to be reunited. Hawaii's State Attorney General announcing a comprehensive review of decisions that were made before, during, and after the fire, and whether people were given enough warning to be able to get to safety. Many telling us they only decided to evacuate after seeing the smoke and the flames and hearing explosions or having neighbors knock on their doors to warn them to get out. But despite all of this and everything that people are going through, that aloha spirit remains strong. We've seen so many banding together in this community, offering help, supplies, doing everything they can to help each other in need. John?
Thank you, Whit. We'll have more on World News tonight. We're going to turn to politics now, just 10 days from the first Republican primary debate. The emerging campaign has been eclipsed by investigations, special counsels, court proceedings, accusations of nefarious and criminal behavior, and talk again of impeachment. If you're having trouble keeping track of it all, you are not alone. Our friends at Axios are now calling this the scandal election. A few weeks ago, the DOJ investigation of Hunter Biden was thought to be all but over. But in a surprising move Friday, Attorney General Merrick Garland announced he's now elevated the prosecutor in that case to the status of special counsel. Garland's move seemed to please nobody and made Democrats unhappy because it raises the prospect of drawing out an investigation that has already been going on for nearly 5 years, and the possibility that we can add a trial of the president's son to the crowded 2024 legal and campaign calendar. Republicans had called for a special counsel, but they denounced the move, saying that now special counsel David Weiss is the wrong man for the job, and vowing to turn up the heat with their own investigations of the Biden family and moving toward an election year impeachment inquiry of the president. Oh, and by the way, President Biden still faces his own special counsel investigation into his handling of classified documents. And then there's former President Donald Trump, who already faces charges in 3 criminal cases and the very real possibility that he'll be indicted for a 4th time in the coming days for trying to overturn the 2020 election results in Georgia. In court Friday, Judge Tanya Chutkin, who is overseeing Jack Smith's election interference case, issued a stern warning to the former president against sharing confidential evidence and intimidating potential witnesses, saying that she will take, quote, whatever measures necessary to safeguard the integrity of these proceedings. We're going to cover it all this morning. Start with former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Preet Bharara, and former Justice Department official.
And Preet Bharara is so much better than Jon. Their panel was so much better than the Fox News panel. And like I said, I pretty much pre-criticized that clip and wanted to juxtapose it to the Fox News Sunday one that spent 3 extra minutes covering the same ground and doing it in a much more partisan way. Jon Karl did use the investigation of the Biden family. I think that journalists should not adopt that Republican talking point language, because the Biden family language is used to cover up the fact that they don't actually have evidence of money going to Joe Biden. Money going to Hunter Biden, some other Biden family members, other business associates, that, the $20 million that sometimes you hear in Republican talking points, is none of it goes to Joe Biden, and it's Hunter Biden, other Biden family members, and then some other business entities associated, which aren't even Biden's. So that would be one extra criticism I wanted to put there. Since we've gotten to the topic of the special counsel, I wanted to respond to a comment I saw in the live comment section here from Ted Cotter. I've seen this same talking point on Fox News a lot. Ted Cotter was asking, aren't special counsel lawyers supposed to be from outside the government, not a state attorney who already has conflicts of interest from previous work, failed plea deal, or... Well, they're actually in the Code of Federal Regulations. I looked it up after I saw this talking point on Fox News. I think it's 6.03 or whatever, in whatever part of the Code of Federal Regulations governs the Justice Department. It says that the special counsels are supposed to be from outside the government. But the thing about the federal regulations is they're like regulations written by the executive branch, the so-called administrative state, that are authorized by laws passed by Congress. But the laws passed by Congress are the statutes. And there's no real criminal enforcement anyway. But the law, I researched what is the law passed by Congress that gives the authority for that particular regulation. It's a law that says the Attorney General shall write regulations for the Department of Justice. So that's the statute authorizing the rule in the Code of Federal Regulations that says that special counsels have to be from outside the government, which means that the real congressional legislative authority there is totally with the Attorney General, who appointed the special counsel anyway. And you could also argue that outside the government could be construed to include a U.S. attorney who was appointed by Donald Trump when this is the government of the Biden administration. They kept him on already because of his independence from the General Justice Department. So that is not a really good talking point about the Code of Federal Regulations that says that a special counsel should be from outside the government, because its statutory authority is with the Attorney General, and David Weiss is kind of outside the Biden administration government anyway. But having answered that question from the live comments, I want to get to the last news summaries here. First, CBS News Face the Nation has the longest news summary on the Maui wildfires. To their credit, they include a very brief clip of Governor Josh Green talking about global warming, but it's mostly the media bias for, if it bleeds, it leads, the bias for, what makes good video and isn't necessarily the most newsworthy. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch CBS News Face the Nation. The host, Margaret Brennan, talking to a couple reporters in Hawaii in this clip.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. I'm Margaret Brennan. We begin today with the horrific, almost surreal scenes of devastation in Hawaii, where county officials now say 93 people are dead in the wake of the wildfires that continue to burn. Crews are bringing in additional cadaver dogs to sift through the rubble of thousands of buildings burnt to the ground, mostly homes. And officials say about 1,000 people have been reported missing. The death toll is expected to climb. We'll look into the local recovery effort and the federal government's assistance, but we want to start with the latest on the ground. Here's CBS News correspondent Carter Evans.
Fire crews are still battling flare-ups across 5 square miles of scorched earth in the small town of Lahaina. So far, authorities have only searched about 3% of the area for victims.
It may be the worst fire that America ever faced by the time it's done.
Rescue workers now have the grim task of identifying charred remains.
When we pick up the remains and they fall apart, and some of you, that's what you're stepping on. I don't know how much more you want me to describe it. That's what you're stepping on.
On Tuesday, the fire came with no warning.
I didn't realize it was really that bad until we started smelling, the smoke.
LaTanya Parker and her family were staying at a hotel in Lahaina when they realized help was not on the way. They barely made it out through the flames. Others who escaped from their homes in Lahaina are now eager to get back.
We lost everything. Thank God that we still have each other. It's like we're the only things we have now because everything that we had in the past is gone.
Investigators say what's left is a toxic mix of debris, too dangerous for people to return. Questions remain about the cause of the fire, and the state's attorney general is now investigating the response.
There are studies showing that exactly this type of fire could have happened in Lahaina, caused by a hurricane. What has been done to prepare for and prevent a fire like this from occurring?
This is the first time we've ever experienced a wildfire in the context of these dry conditions, global warming, and with a hurricane that's just passing us. There's no question this catastrophe is going to change the way everyone looks at fire across the globe.
Margaret, the response here is massive. The National Guard is on scene along with a team of 150 people from FEMA, and more are on the way. Authorities are asking the public here for patience as they sift through the rubble. The road to recovery will be a long one.
That's Carter Evans in Maui. FEMA Director Deanne Criswell toured the damage yesterday with local officials. Our Jonathan Vigliotti spoke with her after.
You were on the ground touring the disaster zone. What did you see and what struck you the most?
It's absolutely heartbreaking to just see an entire community that is no longer there. And I think one of the things that was just really the most shocking, I guess I would say, is the row of cars of people that were trying to drive and escape and then couldn't get out fast enough. And these are the ones that ended up running or jumping into the water, and those cars just there. I mean, it was like a scene from an apocalyptic movie.
We heard from the governor and we heard from the police chief who says only 3% of the disaster zone has been searched. What are your agents being told in terms of how many people they should expect to be searching for?
I was able to talk to the USAR teams, the urban search and rescue teams today, and see the dogs, and they have gridded out the area. They use the dogs and they have the teams that go in there, but it's hot. The ground still has hot spots. The dogs can only work so long before they need a break. And so the 3% covers 3% of the grids that they have mapped out, and now they will just methodically continue to go through that. But I think one of the challenging things is many of the areas that they're in searching There's structures that are partially standing, and so the engineers are embedded with them to evaluate the stability of that structure.
There are currently hundreds of people still missing. How long do you think it will take to conduct this search effort?
I think it just depends on the conditions around us and how long the dogs can continue to go in there. The dogs are the ones that are really making a big difference in helping to identify the location where then the rest of the rescuers can come in and identify if there's any remains there. We're bringing in more. We're bringing in more teams and more dogs so we can speed up that process as much as we can.
Sources close to the search, several of them tell me the death toll could be in the hundreds. Could that be accurate?
If that's what they're telling you, I wouldn't second guess them. They're the ones that know best on what they're seeing and how many people have not been accounted for.
It's Jonathan Vigliotti and FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell. We go now to Democratic Congresswoman.
And the Democratic Congress person there from Hawaii actually also mentioned climate change and global warming in her answer. I'm trying to remember what her name was. I'm looking at the Jill Takuda. And by the way, if you want to see the entire transcript of Face the Nation, well, if you want to watch the entire program, down at a link in the video description under sources is the Face the Nation channel on YouTube, where they have uploaded their entire program to their YouTube channel every Monday for several weeks now. Here, I just put the whole transcript in the live chat there. They did have some mention of global warming from Governor Josh Green, really briefly in that that was like over 5 minutes, that news coverage. That was probably the longest concentration on the Maui wildfires, because, the last two news summaries I showed you split between the Maui wildfires and the legal troubles for Biden and Trump or whatever. And so Face the Nation decided to go all in on the Maui wildfires, which I think might be biased by the "if it bleeds, it leads." Before that clip, I don't know if you were watching me, like there were like gears going around in my head. I was trying to remember, like, what is the bias of the media? The word I'm trying to think of, it was sensationalism. All media has a bias towards sensationalism. If it increases the clicks or the eyeballs or the ad revenue or whatever the metric is that the corporate media is trying to sell you images based on what you want to see. Well, I think the CBS News Face the Nation news summary there kind of fits that type of media bias, not partisan political bias, but the bias for sensationalism and for covering deaths, not the COVID deaths last week, the 300 people who died of COVID every week that's kind of ticking up with this new variant. And there was supposedly like the Barbie Oppenheimer bump to the COVID cases, and who knows. But anyway, that's the bias that I wanted to highlight there. The next news summary is NBC News Meet the Press, Chuck Todd, which for weeks I've been talking about how Chuck Todd, who next month is quitting Meet the Press and turning it over to Kristen Welker, he sometimes seems like he's not even working on Sundays. That was like pre-recorded, and this might also have been pre-recorded. And one other pre-criticism I have of the NBC News Meet the Press news summary is at one point, pay attention, and you will see Chuck Todd claims that Hunter Biden has already pled guilty to criminal charges, as a criticism of Biden for saying he did nothing, of Joe Biden for saying Hunter Biden did nothing wrong. But Hunter Biden didn't plead guilty. His plea deal fell apart, and that's totally wrong. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after this news summary is based not on the Maui wildfires. Another reason I think it might have been pre-recorded, but more on the scandal election. It's a little bit too much of a false equivalency based on something Axios said. And later I'll show you a clip of an Axios voter focus group that had very little understanding of the scandals in the scandal election that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch this clip together over here.
A good Sunday morning. In case you needed another sign that the 2024 campaign will be shaped by legal dramas in courtrooms in Washington, Delaware, Miami, New York, and Atlanta, rather than door-to-door in the state of Iowa, we got a reminder again on Friday. Attorney General Merrick Garland announced that Trump appointee and U.S. Attorney David Weiss, who's been investigating Hunter Biden for alleged tax and gun crimes for 5 years now, had now requested special counsel status, and he's going to get it after a plea deal collapsed in court a few weeks ago when a federal judge balked at granting Hunter Biden expansive immunity.
The appointment of Mr. Weiss reinforces for the American people the department's commitment to both independence and accountability in particularly sensitive matters.
Now, President Biden's son could face a trial at a time when Democrats were hoping to keep the campaign's focus on Donald Trump's legal problems. Now, the two cases, they're hardly comparable. Donald Trump is now under federal indictment for attempting to overturn the 2020 election and for mishandling classified documents that included a U.S. military plan of attack on Iran. President Biden has not been charged with any wrongdoing, and at least so far, Hunter Biden's alleged crimes are 2 years of not paying taxes, which his attorneys say he has since paid, and lying about his drug use at the time of a gun purchase. And clearly, Hunter Biden is not a candidate for president. But President Biden's handling of the case has raised questions at a time when voters already have doubts about his age and political standing. Biden brought his son to a state dinner just 2 days after the plea deal that has since collapsed was announced. And he has repeatedly defended him, denying wrongdoing altogether, even though Hunter Biden himself has pled guilty.
I'm confident. First of all, my son's done nothing wrong. I trust him. I have faith in him.
Thank you. Please, come on, thank you. Did you encourage him to take a plea deal, Mr. President?
In total, there are now 3 special counsels actively at work involved in this presidential campaign. Jack Smith, named in November to oversee the ongoing criminal investigations into Trump's handling of classified documents and his attempts to overturn the 2020 election. Robert Hur, he was named in January to investigate the handling of classified documents found at President Biden's former office and his home. And now, of course, David Weiss. The decision to delay the appointment of Weiss as a special counsel is also a bit hard to understand. Even the language Garland used announcing his appointment Friday, emphasizing independence and accountability in particularly sensitive matters, are almost the exact same phrases that he used when appointing Jack Smith 9 months ago to oversee the Trump cases. The legal calendar will continue to overshadow this political calendar. Trump's lawyers were actually in court on Friday, hashing out the details of what he is allowed to say publicly about the January 6th case in an effort to protect witnesses and the sensitive documents he's about to receive from the Justice Department in discovery. And prosecutors in Georgia, where Trump is likely to be indicted a 4th time in the last year, have indicated they plan to present their case to a grand jury later this week. Still, Donald Trump's rivals are going through the motions of a traditional political campaign, even as he leads them nationally by more than 30 points, and the legal dramas just blot out the sun. And they're trying to catch Trump in Iowa, where he has a dominant lead despite visiting the state just 6 times since announcing his campaign in November. This weekend, they posed with the famous butter cow and food on a stick at the Iowa State Fair. And despite going through the motions of campaigning against him, Trump's rivals have passed up numerous opportunities to criticize him for his, at current count, 78 felony counts. But they jumped at a chance to comment on Hunter Biden.
It just seems to me that they're going to find a way to give him some type of soft glove treatment. And I don't understand why you would appoint this guy to be the special counsel.
Why did it take 2 years to do this? Why did they say Hunter Biden and not the Biden family? You know, why did this suddenly come up when there was all of a sudden the Biden pay-to-play conversation? I don't trust it, but the American people don't trust the Department of Justice.
And joining me now to unpack all of this is former FBI senior official and former U.S. Attorney Chuck Rosenberg,
And Chuck Rosenberg is like the Meet the Press legal panel, that certainly better than Jonathan Turley. Maybe not as good as Preet Bharara, but of the legal panels I showed you earlier. As I promised, you did see at one point in that news summary, Chuck Todd claimed that Hunter Biden had pled guilty when his plea deal actually fell apart. And that, I don't know why that happened. They never corrected that on the show. That's like an inexplicable error. And I mean, I did say that there was a little bit of the false equivalency between the Hunter Biden special counsel and the Trump special counsel, even though at one point I noticed while watching it, Chuck Todd did say they're not really comparable. So at least kudos to Chuck Todd for saying that. Can you tell when that was recorded? Maybe it was recorded on Friday. I don't know. I think Chuck Todd might be taking weekends off, even though he finished the show by saying if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press, which we all know is a lie because they preempt it for sports multiple times a year, and that's a whole rant I don't want to go off on. But before I finish, I have one more news summary to show you, the shortest of the news summaries. This is just a little over a minute. Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union. I guess there's a little bit of the sensationalism bias for the Maui wildfires because they're not covering, like I said, COVID deaths or deaths where there isn't as much video of devastation. But anyway, here's the final news summary. I'll talk about with you a little more before we get to the newsmaker clips and more analysis of the Hunter Biden special counsel appointment after this clip.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is in shock. The fire that swept through Maui this week is now the deadliest U.S. wildfire in more than 100 years, officials said last night, with at least 93 people dead, and that figure is tragically expected to only grow as emergency workers uncover more scenes of horror, lines of abandoned, charred cars that trace the fury of the flames, fanned by the winds of a hurricane hundreds of miles away, homes reduced to ash as people ran for their lives, some of them running into the sea, where some floated for hours, battling fumes and watching their city burn. The ocean off Lahaina, Hawaii, will also need to be dredged for bodies, one leader said. And as those who recover ask desperately for help and information, top officials say they are still battling dangerous circumstances on the ground and pledge to get Hawaii all the resources it needs to recover and to investigate why the island of Maui was not more prepared for this disaster. Joining us now live from Hawaii, Senator Mazie Hirono, a Democrat who spent yesterday surveying the damage on the island.
And did you see at the very end there in the upper right corner, it said Honolulu 3:02 a.m. That's right, Jake Tapper was interviewing Senator Mazie Hirono at like 3 a.m. She looked so tired, but she did a pretty good job. I criticized a couple of the corporate news outlets for not mentioning global warming or climate change. Jake Tapper not only mentioned the crisis of climate change, he did ask Mazie Hirono about the Joe Biden making a false claim when he was on the Weather Channel recently that he declared a climate emergency when he really hadn't. And so kudos to Jake Tapper for bringing up that important information, even though he didn't mention climate change and global warming and the more sensational 1 minute news summary there. I don't know if should I criticize Jake Tapper for not asking Senator Mazie Hirono about the appointment of a special counsel to look into Hunter Biden. If you want to see, I don't know. I mean, because you would think, if I were a journalist and I had a really tired senator talking to me at 3 a.m., that would be like, that's your big chance to like get her to say something she probably shouldn't say, right? Or I don't know, maybe I'm just imagining that. But here's the whole transcript of CNN's State of the Union on Sunday if you want to go and see what Jake Tapper actually asked Mazie Hirono, because I don't have a Mazie Hirono clip. But now I'm going to get into my newsmaker clips, having shown you all the news summaries, which you can juxtapose and tell me which ones you think were like most informative, most biased. There's partisan political bias. There's the sensationalism bias for if it bleeds, it leads video that doesn't really report what's really killing people. Or there's the whole climate change, global warming issue. Tell me which of the big five corporate outlets covered it the best. Or anyway, I think I've gone through that whole issue, and now it's time to get to the newsmakers on the Hunter Biden special counsel appointment. The first person I want to show you here is someone who probably knows the most about this case. As a former criminal defense attorney, I'm always interested in what the attorney for the defendant has to say. And you may remember a couple weeks ago, I talked about how the plea deal broke down between Hunter Biden and the prosecutors. He was supposed to plead guilty at the end of July, but the judge didn't accept the plea because the judge has to like question both sides and make sure that the defendant is making a knowing and intelligent waiver of all his rights, and that the two parties have come to an agreement and they all understand what the terms are. And that like broke down in front of the judge. And as a former public defender who handled, I don't know if it's hundreds or thousands, but probably over 1,000 pleas over my 5 years as a public defender, maybe thousands of pleas. It's not like I counted, but I was saying a couple weeks ago that like maybe 10% of them broke down when the judge is asking all the questions where the defendant has to like admit to all the facts of the crime and admit that they did it. And we all have to agree on what the terms of the deal are. And then the defendant gives up their right to a jury trial, to confront the witnesses against them, to testify or not testify. There's like this whole long list. And like I said, I talked about that a couple weeks ago, but here you have Hunter Biden's attorney explaining there are 3 possible reasons. And you can let me know in the comment section which of the 3 reasons you think. Eventually, I think Abby Lowell, who is an incredibly well-respected criminal defense attorney, he explains the 3 reasons that plea bargain deal broke down. And eventually, I think he tells us which of the 3 possible reasons he thinks it was. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch it together over here.
So let's start with why this plea deal hit the impasse.
So if you were in court or read about what happened on July the 26th, you have to ask yourself, as you just asked me, why? And there are only a few possibilities. Remember, it were the prosecutors who came forward and asked if there was a resolution possible. They're in charge of figuring out the form, the document, and the language. They did that. And so the possibilities are only, 1, they wrote something and weren't clear what they meant. 2, they knew what they meant and misstated it to counsel. Or 3rd, they changed their view as they were standing in court in Delaware. So to answer that question, I'll ask you a question, and everybody else who's paying attention. What group of experienced defense lawyers would allow their client to plead guilty to a misdemeanor on a Monday, keeping in mind that they knew that there could be a felony charge on a Wednesday? That wouldn't happen.
How could there be such a fundamental disagreement on this issue of how broad immunity would be for your client? Because that's what I understand it came down to in that transcript from July.
It did come down to fundamentally that, and then a couple of issues as to what a judge's role could be in the proceedings that the prosecutors wrote the documents for. And how could it happen? I gave you the 3 possibilities. They wrote the language. They insisted on that language. They insisted on 2 different documents.
With the understanding that it would be broad immunity.
With our understanding that it would be broad immunity. And the language, as the judge pointed out, is a very broad phrase. It says encompassing all the facts that were in the document that sets out the transactions. So what happened is one of 3 possibilities. And I again point out that no good defense attorney, and Mr. Biden had quite a few of them, would allow somebody to do a misdemeanor on a Monday thinking that 3 days later there could be a felony.
Are you saying that the government prosecutors are incompetent?
I'm saying there's one of 3 possibilities.
And that was one of them, is what you're suggesting.
I wouldn't say, I didn't use that word, you did.
No,
I said
did.
that they changed their decision on the fly standing up in court.
The U.S. attorney said, due to this impasse, a trial is in order. Is a trial going to happen? Can you avoid one?
Well, the answer to the second question is you can, but let me answer the first question. When you do not have a resolution and somebody pleads not guilty, as Hunter did, then 2 things happen. A judge could put together a scheduling order, the end of which would be a trial. There'd be discovery and motions, et cetera. So that's why that statement was made.
So it's not inevitable?
It's not inevitable, and I think...
And you're trying to avoid one?
Yes, we were trying to avoid one all along, and so were the prosecutors who came forward to us and were the ones to say, can there be a resolution short of a prosecution? So they wanted it, and maybe they still do want it.
So there you see Abby Lowell explaining the three possible reasons that the prosecutors of Hunter Biden didn't stand up for the plea bargain that they had negotiated and written with Hunter Biden's attorneys. And near the end there, he kind of gives away, he thinks it's number three, like they live in court, they like changed their minds about what they were going to offer. And what he said is true. If you're going to do a plea bargain, you want to if you watch the entire Abby Lowell interview, and by the way, down in the video description under sources, there's a link to the Face the Nation YouTube page where you can watch the entire program, and also the entire Abby Lowell interview is there as a specific clip that you can click on and watch the whole thing. And he talks extensively about how there's been this 5-year investigation. If they had anything more than what they were charging, they would have done it years ago when it was the Trump administration Justice Department. That's one of the things that's so maddening about this whole conspiracy theory, is that he's being prosecuted by David Weiss, the U.S. attorney appointed in Delaware by Donald Trump. And a lot of the investigation took place when Bill Barr was the attorney general. A lot of the decisions that Republicans are complaining about took place when Donald Trump's attorney general, Bill Barr, was in charge. So I just wanted to point all that out. And you saw Abby Lowell there pretty much telegraph that he thought they changed their mind for, I don't know why, like during the plea bargain, the allocution from the judge. The judge also had some problems with being the enforcer of whether the gun charge was whether Hunter Biden had undergone diversion successfully. One of the reasons I talked about a couple weeks that the plea bargain broke down is that there was this weird thing where instead of the Justice Department deciding if the defendant had complied with all the conditions of diversion, so he didn't have to plead guilty to this felony gun charge where supposedly he got a gun permit when he was a habitual drug user. Well, instead of the Justice Department overseeing that 2-year diversion agreement, they wanted the judge to do it because 2 years from now, Donald Trump might be president and he might be in control of the Justice Department, and they don't want Donald Trump saying Hunter Biden violated his diversion agreement for no good reason. And that was one of the other reasons the Hunter Biden plea broke down. And that was something I wanted to bring up with this next clip. Very few people have talked about how Hunter Biden might actually have a Second Amendment defense to his gun charge. And the only place on the big 5 corporate outlets I saw that was on NBC News Meet the Press. Betsy Woodruff mentioned it in this panel discussion clip I'm about to show you, which also makes me very worried about the American people. Of course, I'm worried about the American people all the time, but very worried that they're not really paying attention to all these indictments of Donald Trump. I mean, I know my regular viewers, I discuss it in great detail, and there's the Mar-a-Lago documents case, there's the New York Stormy Daniels document fraud case, there's the January 6th and months before January 6th attempt to overturn the election case, and then there's this case that'll probably be charged this week in Georgia, where Trump was on in his so-called perfect phone call asking the Georgia Secretary of State to find me 11,000 whatever votes. And anyway, so those are all, I mean, we all know the Trump investigations, but apparently the Axios, earlier I mentioned Meet the Press when they were talking about the Axios scandal election story, that they had a clip of a voter focus group of people who totally don't understand what the investigations into Trump are. And then by the end of this, Betsy Woodruff will bring up an important Second Amendment issue I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
I want to bring something up, though, about the whole legal. Let me show you this excerpt from an Axios focus group. about the indictments. Michigan swing voters from our friend Rich Tao. Here it is.
Who could tell me what this latest indictment is related to? In other words, what event? Who could tell me what this is related to? Without blurting it out. 5 of you. Shantae, what is it about?
I'm torn on the Georgia or the documents. It's one of those two.
I thought it was about the whole Stormy Daniels scandal.
This is something that you wonder, is it all mud? And it's hard. How many voters are like them that they're just seeing the mud, they're not seeing the details?
There's a real question as to how much the details that continue to emerge in court related to Trump are going to move where voters are at on these things, because there's already been so much out in relation to the former president. When it comes to the Biden side of the issue, though, there's actually a huge potential political landmine for President Biden. That is, Hunter Biden's lawyers have told DOJ that if they bring charges against him of being a drug user in possession of a gun, which is a felony, Hunter's lawyers have said that they will argue that statute is unconstitutional under the Second Amendment. That would mean that if Biden is running for president as someone arguing to constrain gun rights, Hunter's lawyers would be defending him by saying, no, those rights need to be broader. Lots of other criminal defense lawyers have made that case, but talk about a massive political headache for the White House.
So I guess kudos to NBC and Meet the Press for bringing up that possibility of a Second Amendment defense for Hunter Biden, but they didn't mention that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is like one level below the Supreme Court, recently found in this case of U.S. v. Daniels that at least applied to the defendant in the U.S. v. Daniels case, the law that says you can't be a habitual drug user and get a gun permit. Well, that violates the Second Amendment. In fact, I put a link down in the video description to the whole case. Here's like the important paragraph. In short, our history and tradition may support some limits on an intoxicated person's right to carry a weapon, but it does not justify disarming a sober citizen based exclusively on his past drug use, nor do more generalized traditions of disarming dangerous persons support this restriction on non-violent drug users. As applied to Daniels, then, Section 922 sub G sub 3 violates the Second Amendment. Reverse the judgment of conviction and render a dismissal of the indictment against this dude who, he was a habitual marijuana user who got a gun permit and didn't say he was a habitual drug user. Whether that applies to a habitual crack user, as Hunter Biden was, I don't know. I mean, the facts are slightly different, but there is definitely a Second Amendment argument. And I'm surprised Republicans aren't like coming to the support of Hunter Biden's Second Amendment rights. Why is that? Why don't Republicans support the last 14 words of the Second Amendment that say the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed? Aren't they like total maniacs for that? And whatever, you can let me know what you think in the comment section. Now I'm going to show you a couple more Democrats from the House of Representatives talking about the ridiculousness of some of the Republican charges regarding Hunter Biden. First, here's Representative Dan Goldman, I talked about him a couple weeks ago when I talked about the Devin Archer transcript or deposition that eventually turned into a transcript where he specifically said that that Joe Biden never talked business with Hunter Biden. He also specifically said that as far as he knew, the firing of the Ukrainian prosecutor Viktor Shulkin was actually bad for Burisma, and he was on the board of Burisma with Hunter Biden and Hunter Biden's business partner. And anyway, Dan Goldman told us all of that a couple weeks ago, and here he is responding to CNN's Jake Tapper where Jake Tapper does his job as a journalist and asks him about Republican talking points like the Republican idea that David Weiss is biased for Hunter Biden because of the so-called sweetheart deal he offered as a plea bargain. And you just saw Abby Lowell talking about that plea bargain and what it entailed. Here you'll see Dan Goldman talk about how Republicans are really just blowing smoke when they use that sweetheart deal phrase. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that penultimate newsmaker clip together over here.
So House Republicans say, and we kind of heard former Congressman Will Hurd say something similar just now, hey, U.S. Attorney Weiss, he may be a Trump appointee, but he also is the one that signed off on this slap on the wrist sweetheart deal, their words, not mine, when it came to Hunter Biden being charged with 2 misdemeanors in a diversion program instead of full felony charges. Therefore, Speaker McCarthy and other Republicans say David Weiss can't be trusted to be the special counsel. What do you say to that?
Well, no one knows what the evidence is. So when they say this is a sweetheart deal, they are blowing smoke because they have no idea. And so this is, to my mind, having been a federal prosecutor for 10 years, not at all a sweetheart deal. This is something that is routinely treated in a civil way through civil penalties, not criminally. And yet Hunter Biden was charged with crimes. This is a 5-year investigation. They looked at everything. We know that from testimony in the Oversight Committee. They had foreign bank records. They had domestic bank records. They had hundreds of thousands of documents. And this is ultimately what they thought they could charge. Now, in the ordinary course, you would not give immunity for other conduct than what is charged. But this is not the ordinary course because you have a petty, vindictive bully running as the for president on the Republican Party who will use revenge and weaponize the Department of Justice to potentially charge Hunter Biden. So even though I'm sure Hunter Biden has confidence that David Weiss will not charge him with additional crimes, they have no confidence that if Donald Trump wins, that he would weaponize the Department of Justice to charge Hunter Biden, go back and charge him. And that's why this plea agreement has broken down, because of the threat of Donald Trump's weaponization of the Department of Justice if he were to become president.
You said that President Biden has stayed out of that. I know you meant in terms of interfering with the Department of Justice, but I want to play something that the president said in an interview just a few months ago.
My son's done nothing wrong. I trust him. I have faith in him.
I understand this is a dad talking about his son, but it's also the president of the United States talking about a potential defendant in a case that his Justice Department is prosecuting. Also, he was about to plead guilty to some things that he did wrong. Does the president need to stop publicly saying his son did nothing wrong?
Well, look, I think the president has been very clear that he's going to let the process play out. What we do know is that through all of the investigations in Congress, they're simply investigating a private citizen. Hunter Biden is not running for president, and Joe Biden is running for president, and he is the president, and yet, notwithstanding all of the time, effort, and all of the moving goalposts, there's no evidence connecting President Biden to any of his son's business dealings. And you can sing all you want and make all sorts of accusations, but the fact of the matter is that President Biden, there's been no evidence to show that he's been involved in anything. And so Hunter Biden will be treated by the Department of Justice as he should be. But Congress needs to stop investigating a private citizen and stop this fishing expedition to try to link President Biden to Hunter Biden's conduct when there is no evidence to support that.
Well, Devin Archer, Hunter Biden's business partner, told you in closed-door testimony that Hunter would put his father on speakerphone while he was meeting with his business associates, and this happened at least 20 times. And Archer told you that Hunter would use these calls to send signals to his business partners to create the impression that his father was involved and helpful to his business, even if, you're right, as there has been no establishment of any facts that Joe Biden did anything as vice president or president relatedly. But shouldn't President Biden have realized what Hunter was doing here, getting on the phone, talking speakerphone with his business associates? Did he at the very least show a major lapse in judgment and a blind spot with his son and how he handled this?
Look, I think that same witness also made very clear that they never discussed business, that Hunter Biden was trying to promote an illusion of access to his father for his own reasons. That's Hunter Biden, and you can make it whatever judgment you want to make about whether that was appropriate or not. But the president saying hello to people when his son puts them on the phone is not at all doing anything to influence any policy, to use his position for any nefarious purposes. And in fact, what we do know is that the only official action the president took related to Hunter Biden's business interests was detrimental to Hunter Biden's company business interest. It was detrimental to Burisma, as Devin Archer, this new star witness for the Republicans, said, because the Burisma had the corrupt prosecutor general, quote, and I quote the witness, under control, and that was a good thing for that prosecutor general to be in office, and yet Joe Biden urged Ukraine, the Ukrainian government, to fire that prosecutor general. That's the only connection that President Biden had with any of Hunter's business dealings.
All right, Congressman.
So yeah, there was Dan Goldman giving the Democratic spin on the Devin Archer testimony. You know, I actually read through the whole Devin Archer deposition transcript. And one thing about I talked about before the clip how Devin Archer, who was a friend of Hunter Biden's and was on the Burisma board with Hunter Biden, and talked about the 20 phone calls over a decade where Hunter Biden would put his father, Joe Biden, on speakerphone to say hello to people at dinners. That's like twice a year. That's not a lot. And but Devin Archer was also asked by Dan Goldman in the deposition about this, whether the prosecutor who Biden got fired, Victor Shulkin, if he was bad for Burisma or not. And he didn't seem to know much about it. And one thing that wasn't brought out in that back and forth that was a little wrong about what the Democrat spin is, it wasn't Devin Archer who said that firing that prosecutor was good for Burisma. He said that was what they were saying in the D.C. office. That's the talking points coming from the D.C. office, and I'm not even sure what that means, but if you actually read the whole transcript, that's what Devin Archer said in the deposition. But he didn't really back up the Republicans very well either. One other thing that I wanted to point out that came out on the Sunday shows, this is a live comment I saw from one of my longtime viewers and supporters, Matthew, asked in the live comments, Ivanka and Jared literally made millions of dollars while working in the White House. And that's definitely true. Hunter Biden was the son of Joe Biden. There's no evidence that Joe Biden got any money from any of the efforts by Hunter Biden and maybe some other members of the Biden family to cash in on the Biden name. But Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump were both White House officials when Jared got this $2 billion deal from Saudi Arabia, and Ivanka got all these patents from China, and there's a lot of hypocrisy on the Republican side regarding that. But Representative Jamie Raskin in this next clip, he talks about both how Hunter Biden did a lot of things that were like scuzzy and unethical, even though Joe Biden isn't implicated. And he wishes some of the things Hunter Biden did were illegal and what Jared and Ivanka did were illegal, but he can't get any Republicans to actually look into the real problem. And that's the final newsmaker clip I wanted to share with you that backs up what Matthew was saying in the live comments earlier over here.
So I want to ask you more about some of the stuff that the Republicans have been highlighting regarding Hunter Biden. We saw Joe Biden at one point say that Hunter Biden had no dealings, got no money from China. We now see from Hunter's own words that that's not true. Does any of this raise concerns for you? You know, the money from Ukraine, the money from China, the money from Russia. Does any of this,
well,
you know,
look,
whether or not it's criminal, whether or not it warrants special counsel status, are you concerned about this stuff?
Here's what I'm concerned about. During the Trump administration, we saw the development of a completely new public philosophy, which is that government is not an instrument of the common good and the public interest. Government is an instrument for private self-enrichment for the guy who gets in, for his family, for his private businesses. And that's a model that we're seeing all over the world.
But you don't approve of that model, obviously.
I do not.
You denounced that model.
That's what Putin is doing.
Donald Trump, yeah.
That, you know, that's what Orban is doing. That's what Marcos is doing. That's what El Sisi is doing. That's what
it's been going on since the dawn of mankind.
Well, but it's new for America that somebody would get in and basically just say, you know, everything is corrupt and I'm just as corrupt as the next guy and I'm going to take money, as Trump did, from China, from Saudi Arabia, from the United Arab Emirates. I mean, look, you know, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, pocketed a cool $2 billion
from Saudi Arabia.
From Saudi Arabia,
and
in a corporation he created.
And he had the Saudi portfolio in the White House. But what about Hunter?
So I am concerned about it, and I'm concerned not just about public officials like Donald Trump and Jared Kushner who do it, but even family members who water ski along for the ride. And I have been, you know, begging my colleague, Chairman Comer, for us to do a serious analysis of what the laws should be about money making.
And you would take part in a serious investigation?
Yes, of course we would. And we're going to release a report about all of the foreign government emoluments, millions of dollars we can document that Donald Trump pocketed at the hotels, at the golf courses, through business deals when he was president, and that his family got. But they've not laid a glove on Joe Biden as president. They haven't been able to show any criminal corruption on his part. What they've got is Hunter Biden, and we all seem clear that this guy was addicted to drugs and did a lot of really unlawful and wrong things. And we have said, let the justice system run its course. They're not saying that about Donald Trump. Anytime Donald Trump actually gets indicted after a grand jury has already determined that there's probably
they attack the prosecutors.
They attack the prosecutors. They attack the judges.
Right.
They attack the system. For them, Donald Trump could never be guilty of anything.
All right, Jamie Raskin, thank you.
So yeah, kudos there to Representative Jamie Raskin. You see, he's wearing like the headscarf on his head after going through chemotherapy. Best wishes on recovery from cancer, and best wishes on recovery from the cancerous presidency of Donald Trump that we're still trying to recover from as a nation. And Jamie Raskin did a good job of differentiating between. There was like a couple whataboutism squared there, I guess, where he like did whataboutism on the Republican whataboutism, because the whole Hunter Biden scandal is an attempt by Republicans to create a what about Biden response to Trump being indicted for the documents in Mar-a-Lago, the falsifying business records in New York regarding Stormy Daniels' payoff, and then the overturning of the election indictment in Washington, D.C., and then probably the Georgia indictment coming up this week on trying to overturn the Georgia election results. And so Republicans are trying to do whataboutism on Joe Biden based on Hunter Biden, when Hunter Biden is not Joe Biden, and Jamie Raskin pointed that out. He pointed out that a lot of presidential family members try to profit from the name, and talked about Ivanka or Jared Kushner and the Saudi Arabia deal, and how he's trying to get an investigation into that. And then he also did the whataboutism on whataboutism with Republicans who are never mentioning what happened with Trump emoluments, but are all in on what Hunter Biden did that doesn't even involve Joe Biden in any way. And Joe Biden was not a member of the Biden administration like Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump were. But anyway, that was my last newsmaker clip. I'm a Jamie Raskin fan. Even Dan Goldman, even though he's a former prosecutor, I'm not a big fan of former prosecutors. But anyway, I hope you appreciate all the clips I picked out for the program this week, all my additional commentary and criticism. I will be back next Monday and every Monday all the way through January 2025 to cover the whole next election cycle. Maybe I'll have some reason to upload a video later this week. I think there are a couple excerpts I might be able to make from this live stream. I know people like the shorter clips. They don't like the, what are we at, like 1 hour, 25 minutes, but the clips were like 42 minutes. So I have to talk like at least as long as the clips play. So I finally met that goal. I hope you all appreciate the time and effort I put into this program. I appreciate all of you for showing up for the live show. I appreciate the recorded viewers. Oh, and I wanted to give a shout out to Walter Irving, who just became a member of my YouTube channel. Down underneath the video, you can click the join button and become a YouTube member. Right at the top of the video description, I put links in to become a monthly patron on Patreon or a one-time PayPal contribution if you want to financially contribute to support what I'm doing. Last week, my video got demonetized, like during the whole time people were watching it. I think because I had like insurrection or overturning 2020 election in my description or tags, or I don't know why. But anyway, if you really want to have me keep doing this with the remuneration I deserve for the effort I put in 8 to 10 hours a week, those are ways you can support the channel. And otherwise, until next Monday or until I have some other reason to upload a video, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.